Hello, everybody, and welcome again to Procrastinator's Pit Stop. We have another amazing guest for you today, Richard Zwicky. With over 18 foundational internet patents and a track record of building successful companies worldwide, Richard's leadership has driven teams of up to 500 and generated significant revenue growth. His mission extends beyond business, focusing on empowering individuals to discover their unique strengths and align their passions with meaningful, community-oriented success. Richard, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks for having me aboard.
We're very happy to have you aboard. I think we have some very interesting things we're going to go over. Before we dive into it, though, we do have an icebreaker on the show. And the question for you today was, which cartoon character do you resonate with the most and why?
Yeah, that's a funny one, and how I have to think about for a second. But I back when I was in college, a bunch of my friends gave me the nickname Tigger and it was probably a reflection of my ADHD. I would just be able to bounce around and go from thing to thing, and it was like there was always a spring in my step. And I think maybe that's stuck, and maybe that's what I identify with most, and it actually represents in the way how I can bounce from topic to topic and always find ways to be happy.
I like that. And it actually ties into something that you said earlier on the, pre-show. You mentioned that when we're talking about neurodivergence, in my universe, I'm the only normal one. And in your universe, you're the only, you're the only one. So the most wonderful thing about Tiggers is you're the only
I'm
one.
the only one. That's right.
So I like that one. I like that. Like that.
Yeah, no, it's funny, and touching on that is, that's always a big thing for people with neurodivergence, is because we look at everybody else and we think we're always amazed at how they think or the things that they can do, and we often don't appreciate the amazing things we can, but we see some of the challenges. And when we actually come to realize that everybody else is also divergent from us and would probably look at us the same and wonder, how do we do certain things? It's no different. It's just how we approach them and how we accept them and find ways to manage that varies from one person to the next.
I like that. I like that viewpoint. So let's get into this because I'm really interested. So what what is your definition of procrastination, Richard, and how do you define it, and what does it mean to you personally?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the big one is stuff I don't want, or I'm not interested in. I find every which way to push off into the future. But the other side about it is also when you have things that you really enjoy and appreciate, which you sometimes get over focused, but you tend to be able to find great ways to work in short bursts, like 25-minute intense, but then you have to take a break or you begin to drift off because other things are interrupting you. And the problem with procrastination is, especially when you do have ADHD, is you've always got those things niggling around in the back of your mind that have to be done that are distractions for you. And so procrastination is really all about, it's like when you're a kid, you save the foods you like the least for last. And what you have to learn to do is eat them first so you can enjoy the rest of your meal. And,
I like that.
when you're managing people, it's the same thing. It's how do you find ways to keep them excited and interested, but recognizing that not every area of the job is going to be of equal interest. So you end up building teams that are incredibly balanced, where some people like the more rote, organized, straightforward aspects, and some are the free thinkers who come up with the ideas, but really need the help getting focused, minimizing the distractions, and having the boundaries set for them to focus in and do things, because procrastination is very often a reflection of innovation and imaginative thinkers.
I like that. Yeah, and you are right. The subset of the dreamers or the innovators. So definitely like that. And so what is your secret sauce that you would use to beat procrastination as it relates to yourself?
Yeah, it's really hard to hold yourself accountable when you're a procrastinator because you can always find reasons to do something else. But when you pair up with somebody at work or, in your personal life or anything else, you then define them as your point of accountability in your interactions. So with my staff, I'd always explain, part of my philosophy was, even though I was building a team and, it didn't matter how many people there were, my primary role was to make sure they had everything they needed to do they needed to be able to accomplish their jobs to be successful. And my mission was to make sure they got it as quickly and efficiently as possible. So if anybody had an ask for me, that was an accountability. They needed something, I had to get it to them. So you create that form of accountability where it is two-way, and it should be, that as a boss or manager, you should recognize you, the leader, you are responsible for the team you hire, but you actually take that a bit further where you make it your almost like a co-working situation where it is your measure of accountability. And that helps you manage so much more efficiently because you know what the tasks are that are needed on a consistent basis, and you don't allow yourself to get distracted because your team is also telling you in many ways where the priorities are that they're seeing. Even if you're getting distracted and thinking about 100 different things, this group is keeping you grounded and focused in this area. That I found very beneficial. And that also works the other way because with your teams, you're able to do the same thing.
Yeah, I like that. The accountability partners for sure. The only question I usually have with that, and I ask everybody, and I'd be really interested to hear your take on it. Why do you think it's hard sometimes to keep ourselves accountable to just ourselves?
That question goes into a myriad of issues, and it depends on the person's background. People who have been abused tend to have issues around self-esteem, and so they don't prioritize themselves over others. People who have a issue just in general with the distraction don't know or don't have that reminder going off to keep them on track. And in each of the cases, you need to find different tools to help the individual because you don't know what somebody's background is. You don't know they've been abused or what kind of abuse or what the trigger is. But you can see the end behavior and understand this person has a hard time keeping on track. How do we cultivate that positive mindset around the accomplishments of getting through the milestones so that those achievements become part of the reward cycle? And if it happens to be somebody who has suffered through abuse, those rewards help build the self-esteem and self-worth. If it's somebody who has a distraction issue, it again becomes a way to chip away at the distractions because whenever you have an accomplishment or achievement, it's a validation. And one of the problems for people who are, who do get distracted easily, who have and procrastination issues is, of course, we often are perfectionists. And those tie back to both of the other issues. We procrastinate because we're trying to figure out the best way and the most perfect way to get it done, not accepting that there is a standard that really is good enough, and good enough is so that everybody else can get their job done as well, right? And there's the old 80-20 rule, which you talk about, which is, it takes 20% of the time to get 80% of the work done, but that last 20% takes us 80% of the time. But the reality is, and it's a hard thing to accept at first, once you really come to recognize it, if you can get 80% of things done, you're incredibly successful. And I'll use an analogy which is a bit uncommon there. But if you see a player in a hockey game and they're considered to be a phenomenal goal scorer, they're not going to be scoring 20% of the time. Wayne Gretzky only scored on 17% of his shots. And yet he's the best point getter in the history of the NHL. I think it was 17.6. I was looking it up the other day. Mike Bossy was at 20%, and he's considered the best pure goal scorer ever. Right? And so 80% of the time he missed, but 80% of the time he was learning, and it was good enough to get to the net, and he got an assist off of it. So you have to look at it beyond you getting this perfect. It's how does everybody else also move forward because of the work you do.
I like that. I like that analogy, and it goes into, building community, which is how we really move things forward,
It
right?
is.
Because if you want to, yeah, because the saying is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Something like that. I think I probably put.
Well, no, it's you're on the track, and it's also sometimes you have to go slow to go fast. And in this case, sometimes it means you bring the community along. You don't go quite as fast because you have people going at different speeds, but you accomplish so much more. You build that momentum, inertia, and that you're building that accountability mechanism for yourself as you're doing that because you're responsible to each other.
I like that. I like that. You did mention something interesting as well. So outside of accountability and having somebody or having the assistance of your team or having the assistance of another person. I mean, I myself go through the same thing every day. We have tons of distractions, but the other thing is that if your phone's going off all the time, like mine often is too, it just goes ding, 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 ding all the time. How do you personally differentiate which dings are important and which dings are not?
Yeah, that's a good one. And your phone is the most incredible device for keeping you on track when you do have issues around focus. Both because like I use it, I put in calendar reminders nonstop. I have to go buy eggs. I make it a calendar appointment. So I remember to go buy eggs, right? I have to send a letter, an email, or something else. I schedule that. If I'm walking around, it pops into my mind and something that I have to do or forgot to do. I put in my calendar for a time when I know I'm going to be by my computer or anything else, because then I have the reminder to keep me on track. And alerts, I use that do not disturb function. I tie it right into it. So if I scheduled myself time to do something, my do not disturb comes on. Otherwise, I'll get completely distracted. And I think we all do, right? Because there's almost always something more interesting.
Hmm.
And when those alerts are on, the only people who can get through to me are my kids and my mom, right? Because if they have an emergency, I have to be there. But other than that, everybody's out.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Just backtracking just a little
Yeah.
bit here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey and how you came to be where you are today? And I know you had a little bit of an interesting transition there in the middle, so I'm interested in hearing more, and I'm sure our listeners are too.
Yeah. I moved out to Victoria, BC about almost 30 years ago and built a small retail chain out here, which I ended up selling. And I started then on the internet and first built an e-commerce business, which was really a lot of fun. But I got into analytics and I built a digital marketing firm, software based. But I had some really interesting ideas around the data and how to do predictive analytics. And those, I ended up writing a bunch of patents, and the technologies that are outlined in the patents have been used extensively. Predictive analytic systems such as how do you predict where the car beside you is headed if you're on autopilot, ties back to the patents I wrote. It's quite fascinating to see how an idea which was built around digital marketing can be used in so many different ways. But I built that analytics firm and ended up exiting in 2010. Did a couple of other interesting things and ended up building a cannabis firm down in South America, starting in 2017, 2018. And that was absolutely fascinating. But then in March of 2020, before they declared it a pandemic, I fell ill with COVID. And I ended up with horrific brain fog, and it got progressively worse. I finished with COVID after 2 weeks, or so I wished. And I had a team of about 130 people working with me, and most of them speaking Spanish. So most of my days were spent in Spanish, which is not my first or second language. And we were working through pharmaceutical certification for the production, and we were working through a number of things. And we were working through some really challenging business issues, not just with the pandemic, but the government's refusing to allow sales and exports, which without revenue, you can't make it in business. And on the other side, I was fighting with the issues around the brain fog and fatigue. And after a couple of months, I basically had to pack it in and give up. And I had to step out, and that wasn't fun. Was having, a lot of challenges at the time. And I ended up not being able to work at all through 21. I actually don't remember anything from that year. I have no memories whatsoever, which is incredibly frustrating. And at some point late in 21, or sometime in 21, I just started, researching what the heck was going wrong with me. What was going on? My mind couldn't work. Doctors had no idea. Long COVID had no description. And I started looking at all the mental health conditions and working through how can I help myself. And eventually I narrowed it down. I tried SSRIs, which are antidepressants, because I had the physical aspects of depression, but I didn't have the mental related issues with it. But I thought, if that maybe there's a relationship, and it helped, but not sufficiently. And I narrowed it down to the amino acids through the various research. And eventually, there was in August of 23, just as I'd started doing a broad spectrum amino acid buildup, there was a report out by the University of Dublin and University of Pennsylvania that showed that there were 1,749 people they'd studied who had the same issues I did, none of whom were able to extract tryptophan from their food anymore. And tryptophan is required to manufacture serotonin and melatonin, without which you can't stay awake and you can't stay focused and you have a hard time sleeping, which were the physical issues that I was dealing with. I mean, it was so bad. If I'd had done this interview, I wouldn't have been quite as lucid, but I would have needed a nap at the end of it. And, 30-minute conversation required a nap. And that was incredibly frustrating. Reading a single page in a document required, 3, 4, 5 tries to understand what I was reading by the time I got really bad. And I started taking, the amino acids in larger doses with consultation with the doctors. And I rebuilt my reservoir of tryptophan in my stomach, and my system's been able to adapt since. And I think by December last year, I'd come back to full strength or almost full strength. And every month I notice still slight improvements. That process, though, gave me incredible insights into the challenges people feel with or deal with mental health. And interestingly for me, with a background in analytics, I recognized that, and speaking with a lot of the doctors, there are no measurement protocols around the treatment of mental health that are effective. Therapists work one-on-one, and they take 10 years to build a new treatment protocol. But because they have only so many appointments in the year, they effectively see 110 patients in a year. It takes them 10 years to validate, because you have 110 different, you have 1,300 slots, one patient a month. You have 110 patients if you look at it for a year-round treatment. And it takes them 10 years to get enough data to validate, did their system, their protocol work? But they don't know, did it work for, let's say it's teenage alcoholism or alcoholism, how did it work for a 17 to 24-year-old versus a 40 to 50-year-old? Because the language we use is different, and the protocols and male-female is different, and our socioeconomic backgrounds are different. And the therapist knows how to modify the treatment individually, but they don't have any scale data to show what works or what doesn't. And that actually gave rise to me starting to build a mental health platform which focused on the measurement of how the treatments are being received and how are they helping people, or how are they not, so that the therapist can iterate their teachings more rapidly. And I'm working with organizations like the Fulbright Foundation, which is one of the largest research organizations in the world, and a couple of universities and quite a few therapists around the system. But it's designed to be open, so any therapist who's building content to help people is able to deliver like a content delivery network, but get the data to understand what's working and what's not. And also because organizations last year spent almost $500 billion on mental health and have no idea what the value is received for the investment they're making in their employees and their employees' families. And we need to understand so we can do better, because in any other area of business, we operate predicated on the philosophy which is you can't manage what you don't measure. And I built an analytics firm before around measurement, and I realized we have this challenge, which mental health is a huge crisis worldwide, and we're not measuring the impact properly, and we're not measuring the treatment systems properly. And so we're running and throwing money at this problem, and people want to help, but we're unable to properly do so because we're not really measuring it to understand and be able to replicate what worked and what didn't across individuals and groups. And we tend to assume too much. And one of the things I learned with analytics is just a simple term, let's say like, your listener may know the word like cabin or retreat or cottage. There's actually 40 different terms for that same thing in North America alone. So when you think of that, and when you're speaking to a patient or somebody who's listening, you have to speak to them in the terms that are the most apt and appropriate for them. And a 15-year-old and a 50-year-old will listen to and have different vocabulary and different terminology they use. So that these protocols have to be as well. So that's really a bunch of what, my journey has been around figuring out really interesting problems and developing solutions. And it's actually in many ways because of my own ADHD and procrastinations where I'm able to zoom in on ideas and think about them differently, that I recognize problems and start to find them, find the solution. I hope that wasn't too long-winded as an answer.
No, no, no. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And you actually hit on a very big topic at the end there about how we don't really monitor different things. And if you don't monitor it, if you don't have the information, you can't manage it. One very good example I have, and I might even take this, off the podcast just to see how it could be implemented in our school systems, because I've seen a very big lack in terms of mental health for students. I mean, they're kind of scraping at it, but like you said, it's different. Vocabulary is different, frame of mind is different, hormones are involved, all this different things are involved. But the way that I've seen that they tackle the problem is uh, very it's very specific to one kind of person. So when you're dealing with bullying, they say, oh, the think program, be kind, act, whatever. But as we all know, if you're in a dark spot, whether you're a bully, victim, whatever, you're not necessarily in the spot to receive that. So to me, we should be putting more experimentation, at least, or more investigation into emotional regulation in schools, and how to deal with that sort of thing, how to diffuse that sort of thing, rather than say, oh, just be kind and it'll all work out. Because unfortunately, in a perfect world, it would. But, well, I know personally kids can be cruel, and I understand, no judging. But, we need to approach it differently, like you said.
We do need to approach it differently. And, the CDC, along with Kaiser Permanente, did an interesting study, or fascinating study, between 95 and 97, called the Study into Adverse Childhood Experiences. And it's known by the acronym the ACE study, but it was able to tie, I think, close to 95% of all adult mental health issues to adverse childhood experiences, which might be traumas, there could be the abuses, there's a combination of things. But the thing that struck me is, if 95% of our adult mental health issues tie back to our childhood, and the effect of that is when people are triggered and suffering from stress, they unleash their pain somehow, for the most part, right? Some people internalize it, but others do lash out, and they tend to repeat the cycle of abuse. When you see somebody who's a bully, it's learned behavior. Nobody is born a bully, but they're suffered somewhere, and they've learned that this is how they can take away their own suffering, is by putting it onto somebody else. When you see any of these behaviors, you have to recognize it's a cycle. And what I'm trying to do with mine is, how do you break that cycle? Because if we can stop one child from being abused, we can stop one person from committing suicide later. And that's an incredible accomplishment in life.
Yeah, I definitely like that, and I love that, and I'm sure that this is so great, and I mean, you've already had some great success with this, and you're on a good path. What do you think is the biggest challenge with getting this system out there, and getting it adopted?
You know what? The demand for the system is massive, and I've been building it for I started the research back in 21, as starting to read and figure it out. It's complicated because you have to build a system that begins to understand the human mind and is able to predict when is a person best able to receive this information, but also their reactions. And that's funny enough, I've just written another patent around that whole thing and filed it just in the last couple of weeks, because it is such an invaluable insight in terms of the predictive analytics and on behavior. But people have been incredibly focused on spending their time and effort on helping people, right, in the moment. And because the crisis is so severe, it's how do we get people and keep people on the rails and on track so that they're able to function, they're able to manage. We haven't been spending the time to figure out how do we differentiate between the solutions. So as a consumer, you might go out and try Calm and it might help you. or you might have to go into Headspace, or you might phone one of the telehealth systems. You're going to find something that helps you, but we haven't figured out why, and we haven't figured out what are the commonalities. And the other part of the ACE study that was fascinating is it showed that 1 in 3 people, if they're provided the right tools and information, are able to learn the coping mechanisms so that they can manage without the outbursts, without being triggered, without feeling the pain. Because whenever we're in that situation, we're reliving the pain that we experienced in those moments of abuse or trauma. And we're then pushing it out on others. And it's a complicated system. So, it's taken me and the team I've put together about 3 years to get to the point we are, where we're now rolling forward with going to offer it to the first initial clients or users and collect the data and validate, is it working at scale and what do we need to tweak? And then ideally, it's offered so that anybody can use it. If you're Calm and you're IBM, IBM wants to offer Calm, it can, but it can see how's it working. But if you're a telehealth organization, you can offer it, and it's a step towards seeing the therapist. Or when you're, with the therapist I'm working with, they look at it as being in partner with, because they might be able to see you once a month, but in between, they need to understand, how are you doing? Not that you come back at the end of the month and you're in a horrible position. They want to know if you fall off the cliff in 2 weeks because you need an immediate appointment, or they want to know you're walking in and, we can see regular progress. Just like any doctor, when you go to see them, if you've broken your arm, they can set your arm and they can look at it in 2 weeks, 6 weeks and see it's healed. But when we're trying to deal with somebody with a mental health issue, it's still an injury. And we don't know if it's healed because we can't see inside the mind. We can only see the behavior, but that isn't always clear because it's in the moment. But the system can know that. And that's what's incredibly powerful, because then your treatments can become managed to your own needs. And your needs are going to be ongoing, unfortunately, because this damage is something in your past that is going to be there, but it doesn't mean it has to affect how you operate tomorrow.
No, and you're absolutely right. I mean, everything is programming. Nobody, and I like going on the facet that nobody's broken.
That's right.
It's just that they're just operating however their programming and environment dictated before. So one of the things that I was thinking of when you were talking about that system is how do you keep the patient engaged? Because I know Calm has these, I believe they have these "How are you feeling today?" kind of check-ins. Is that similar to
You
yours?
have to have some form of engagement along the way that does do daily, like I call them daily messages of affirmation. It's going to be thoughts that go out to you, things to think about that are moments of reflection, that also just are check-ins and that help us understand. And, it isn't two-dimensional. It's not just based around this treatment course, how's it affecting you? It has to do with, who are you as an individual? Because your personality is different than the next person. And the way you view the world is different. So the way you see the challenges you deal with are also completely unique and should be addressed as such.
No, and you're absolutely right. And the other facet that plays into this, actually, I want to get your thoughts on it, because AI is a wonderful thing. It's a tool, a great tool. How and I've been dealing with this myself, with just thinking about my own clients and just in the future. So, do you think it's more effective to have those sort of check-ins done by an automated system, or do you think there's more value in having just a quick 10-minute check-in? And obviously, the issue is obviously it's not scalable, right?
Right.
If you do like real person check-in, but my interest would lie in if there's any data that suggests that having that daily check-in, whether it's by this prompt or whether it's by a person, if that makes a difference.
It depends on the circumstance, right? And fundamentally, a database check-in is fine in terms of validating baselines and looking for aberrations. And aberrations are just you're feeling better or worse than normal or within a range of your normal. And the thing is, normal is you, right? Just spoke about her at the start in neurodivergence. I'm the only normal person in the whole multiverse. in mine, but in yours, you're the only normal person. And the same has to be held true in terms of when we start interpreting and trying to help people. An individual state of normal is going to vary dramatically. And we have to be able to understand what that is and baseline it from there. And so then the daily check-ins or the system check-ins are validating against your individual state as a state of normal, which may change over time, right? Because that also, you ideally want your normal to constantly be to a better place. And the system has to be able to understand that. But if there is a moment of crisis, there absolutely has to be an intervention with not just a 10-minute call, but as long as call is needed to help you get over that challenge, that issue, that, you can call it that hump. It doesn't matter what it is. It's whatever is inflicting the pain on you in that moment that is causing you not to function the way you would like to and is causing you anguish. You need to be able to address at that time. And part of the problem in the mental health space today is, if you're able and have the luxury of being able to get into a private practice, you can see therapists relatively quickly. They have some waits, but they have, but if you're like here in Victoria, the kids who go to a place called the Foundry, which is the mental health organization for the youth, and they have a 10-month wait. And if you're suicidal, you don't have 10 months. You need something now. And that's a big part of what we have to be able to address is, how do we help people now? One, how do we help cut down on that 10-month wait? But how do we help them through, even if it's going to be a month or 2 months? That's better than 10, but how do we help them through that? And so if 1 in 3 people are able to help themselves just with the tools, which is what the data has shown, now we cut that 10-month wait down to 5.5. And they found that people who come in well prepared and who have recognized what the source of their anguish is, right? Because one of the biggest challenges is to confront the memory of what was that moment or first moment of abuse or that moment of trauma that inflicted the pain in the first place. If you're able to confront it, know it happened to you, and able to speak to it, even to speak to it to yourself in the mirror, because that's the most powerful voice you've got, you're able to start wrestling it under control. Because when you suffer one of those moments, it carries forward with you because you always blame yourself. And you always think every time you're triggered, every time something hits you, euphemistically, you relive that moment and you think you're going through it again and you become defensive, but you also blame yourself for it. And you have to overcome that. You have to learn that this happened and it happened in the past, and it's not your fault. It's not your fault that somebody beat you, right? It's not your fault that somebody bullied you. It's not your fault that any of these things happened to you. You were 4 years old, 2 years old, 6 years old. You were defenseless. And it is other people's fault they didn't listen to you if you stepped forward and said this happened. But more often than not, you're told right at the start, this happened because it's your fault. And you learn that. But when you can acknowledge it wasn't your fault, you weren't responsible for the fact that somebody beat you, now you're starting to gain control over it. And that moment, and being able to do that, if you're able to get to that point before you really start or early into your therapy sessions, you're able to cut down by more than half on the number of sessions you need to get to the place of peace you seek. It doesn't mean that you're never going to have problems in the future or you're not going to be affected. It's going to happen, but you're going to know how to cope with it, manage it, and say, no, this isn't my past. This is not me today. It's not happening. And that's a huge thing. So if you can I look at it in terms of 50%, if we can cut down by 50% on the number of visits people need, it means we're able to cut down and open up more time for the therapists to deal with everybody in depth as they need. Because right now they're spending a lot of time, like a lot of them take 6 months to a year to establish a relationship of trust. We can help accelerate that. And those are incredibly powerful values to give, or opportunities to give back to those professionals who are really trying to just help everybody else.
And yeah, just touching on that a little bit. I mean, we're talking about cases that, excuse me, are pretty obvious, I would say, right? That those are people that they already know. But what about those people, and there's many of them, where maybe they run around, because a lot of this is just happening subconsciously. We may not even necessarily associate a certain event with something. I mean,
Absolutely.
I'll just give a quick example. I myself, about 3.5 weeks ago, discovered that something that happened to me that I thought I got over, and I understand how it affected my life. I almost drowned, by the way, as I was learning to swim. So I understand that, intrinsically I understood that, okay, that's why I don't like water sports. I don't, like going out of lakes and boats. I don't, all that fun stuff. But I also, just made the connection a little while ago that it also had to do with, why I never really asked for help and why I had a problem asking for help for a long time. And also why, I had a little bit of that rescuer syndrome. But see, that took 34 years to figure out. Well, I'm sorry, no, 32 years, 32 years to figure out. So, and it wasn't really affecting my life in a big way per se, but how can we even start to have an awareness of that? If it's all going on, in the back.
It's hard. And that's where different therapists use different techniques to help open people's minds to safely understand and see what happened to them, right? Because you can't just say, well, this is how we do it, because it's not going to work for everybody. Not everybody's going to welcome the same safe spot to have that discussion or to feel comfortable to confront what happened to them, right? And most people, well, pretty much everybody will try and avoid pain. And when you're dealing with these issues, you are dealing with pain and you're recognizing a wound that never healed. But even more impactfully for you, you think of it as yourself because it's in your mind. And we are our minds. So therefore we think there must be something wrong with us because there's something off, right? There's something that's there. And so it's a horribly difficult piece to confront because you're confronting and having to challenge yourself, not the question of who do others think you are, but who do you know you are? And those are two different things because you tend to mask to the rest of the world. You don't show people the pain you have walking around. If you're walking around the street, you don't look left and right and realize 61% of the people who are around me suffered through some form of adverse childhood experience. You know yours, right? I know mine, right? I didn't want to accept or even look at many of the incidents until I was much older. And even some that I recognized before when I would say, yeah, that happened and that was it. But I never affected the context. And the most horrific ones, I didn't even look at. I just couldn't bear to. But I came to recognize they don't define me. What defines me are the things I do today and the fact that I keep trying to be better and I keep trying to do more and that I didn't repeat the errors and the sins, that horrible things that happened to me, to my own kids, right? And that's the biggest thing, is breaking that cycle. So confronting it is hard. If it's a trauma, which, if you had a water-based experience and you nearly drowned, that's traumatic. If somebody held your head underwater, that's abuse. And then it's, why did they do that to me? What did I do wrong to deserve that? And it starts defining you in terms of your thoughts of who are you and what's your value if somebody would do that to you, which isn't reflection on. But we don't think of it that way at first. We think it's us and we deserved it, no matter how hard we try and think otherwise, until we can rationalize it and we can see it for what it was. Somebody did this to me. And it's not that we did anything wrong. We just were there. If I hadn't been there, somebody else would have suffered the same fate. And you then can compartmentalize it and And it doesn't not hurt you because it's painful, but you're able to recognize it doesn't hurt me today and it doesn't change who I am today. I'm capable and I have value and I'm worth. And that's where it's a matter of sometimes also recognizing how much good and how much value you do have. And the best way to see that is, you think of somebody who matters a lot to you, and the look that comes over their face when you do something nice for them, when you even walk in the room and they're happy to see you, and you realize I have that value. My presence, my being matters to them and delivers something incredible to them. It helps you recognize you matter. And when you are a victim of abuse, you fight for a long time thinking you don't matter.
Well, it's certainly important work, what you're doing, and I certainly hope that our listeners today are getting a lot of value out of this, and um, you're you're making great strides. Where would you say that you see yourself within the next year, and then maybe the next 5 years with this project? Where do you see it going?
So with this project, my first goal is I'm really looking to work with a number of children's organizations to start helping with them, and through organizations like Fulbright with students, because want to help everybody and want to help through organization, want to help, but the biggest thing is to break the cycle of abuse. In my mind, we can't prevent trauma because accidents happen, right? If it's a car accident, you see somebody getting hit or something, that's trauma. You can't change that, but we can change abuse. And if we can break that cycle, we can improve everybody's quality of life in the future. And that is really going to be accomplished by helping the ones who haven't yet had the children and aren't yet repeating the same errors. And, our children are our future. They're our legacy. And it's not just our children, it's the ones that we raise as a community, because, whether you have a child or not, you're still affecting the future around you. And our children are really the community's children. And we need to think about what are we leaving behind and what do we do next? Because we did all our work today to get where we are for a reason. And that's a societal issue.
No, you're absolutely right, and it's true, and sometimes we don't even think about who's around when we do certain things too. Um, I've been guilty of this. I've been having discussions with people in restaurants or
Yep.
in cafes, and maybe there was a little kid at the table next to me, and here we are discussing. What were we discussing? We were just discussing, well, just to say that they were pretty. These were topics that we weren't screaming them out, but I mean, it might frighten little children if
Yep.
they heard about it, right?
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So we always need to be aware of that.
We do. And we need to be aware of how we speak and how we come across. I actually just republished a book I wrote which funny enough is called Assholes Matter. But assholes goes back to Robert Sutton's premise, who was a professor at Stanford, that, there can be temporary assholes, people who just erupt and say something poorly and it comes across badly. And there are persistent ones who really haven't worked out some of the challenges and issues they're dealing with, and they inflict the pain on others and they do the damage. And, I've been an asshole where I've just been rude to people and I haven't meant to be. And it horrifies me when it happens. We all are. We all do that from time to time. And the question is, how do we deal with it? But it's how do we take criticism and how do we make it constructive is what differentiates and helps us not be the asshole and be the one who helps build each other up. And so that whole book was written about constructive criticism and its effect on mental health in the workplace, because we spend 24% of our lives at work. Right? We spend 8 hours a day, which is, significant, at work, and we interact with everybody. And the issues we have at work, we take home, and the issues we have at home, we take to work. And if we're not able to communicate in constructive ways, we end up doing damage onto others. And that pain, whether we recognize it or not, is something we can control. And if we're going to build great organizations and make great strides, And it doesn't matter if it's a business or political organization. You look at the political discourse that goes on, it should be constructive. But today, all we talk about is what's wrong with the others. There are no others. It's just us. And we need to get over that. And we need to be constructive in our approach, because without constructivity, it doesn't matter which way it ends up going, we don't make progress.
No, you're absolutely right. But we need to just figure out, again, like you said, a constructive way to put things. We are coming up pretty close to the time here, Richard. It's been a great conversation. You know, I could probably go on about this for hours because I'm an advocate, and you know, I really appreciate your message. I really appreciate, you know, the work that you're doing. I'd love to connect with you, you know, even after the show,
Absolutely.
and just see how we can collaborate, how we can move that vision forward.
Love to.
That being said, is there anything today, Richard, that you think that maybe I should have asked but I didn't ask, or anything that we should have covered that we didn't cover?
We covered a lot of ground. And, you know, I'd welcome if listeners have questions, they should email or message and ask more. It's always hard to know what we haven't covered when we're in the moment. But I think we covered a lot of ground, and it was really interesting for me to hear the questions and to try to answer them as best possible.
Thank you for that. And just before we go, then, what is that best way for people to reach out to you? Website?
Yeah, I mean, LinkedIn is fantastic because it's always a great communication tool. Otherwise, it's rzwicky, rzwicky @gmail.com is the simplest and broadest email.
Excellent. Well, thanks a lot for that, Richard. And to our listeners, don't worry about grabbing a paper and pen. You know, we'll have that in the show notes, just like we always do. And once again, Richard, thank you for being on the show. And to all our listeners, you know, thank you for listening and tuning in once again. And just remember, if you know you can't find that motivation or inspiration for yourself today, just go out and try to be that motivation and inspiration for someone else. And we'll see you again next time.